Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the YouTubes. I am back. I'm your host for tonight, Adam Steele from Hot Pole Studios, and today we are going to be talking about PCs. Oh, excuse me. For music production. And not exactly the most professional intro. I do apologise, but it's live, so something's going to happen. Excuse me. I was just trying to rush to get live on stream for 8 o'clock, and I seem to have breathed in my dinner, so apologies for that. Now, we're going to talk about different kinds of audio production PC. Let's just get the green screen as good as we can. Could have sworn I tested this not 10 minutes ago. But that's what happens with these setups, they're useless. Anywho, so we're going to talk about audio production computers, whether Intel or AMD, and whether if you're looking at Intel, you should look at i5, i7, i9, and if you're looking at AMD, whether you should look at Ryzen or Threadripper. Any questions, feel free to fire away in the chat as we go. What we're going to do is we are going to use one of my favourite companies, and that is, if I can switch over, a company called Scan. Scan are a UK-based company. They have one of the highest kind of levels of respect in the industry as far as our country goes. I know that if you're in the US, you're not going to really have... It's not going to really help you directly using this, but the same products should be available in US retailers. And I know this site well. The laptop that I'm using to do the web browsing stuff, which is my kind of travel computer, is a Scan custom build. And all the components in my streaming machine are from Scan as well. So I trust them fairly well. Now, where do we begin? So, let's start by looking at what you need for audio production. The question is not just, are you going to record audio? The question is, well, let's just go on the assumption that you're going to build a brand new machine today. Let's say you've been working on either an old laptop or a years old desktop machine. It's not cutting the mustard anymore. It's not doing what you need. So it's time to upgrade to something completely new. So that begs the question, Intel or AMD, as the main question, because up until recently, that wasn't really a question, because to compare the two, this being the main processor, by the way, if you're not familiar with the whole Intel AMD argument, they're the two main manufacturers. Intel make the i3, i5, i7, and now the i9, and AMD make the now Ryzen and Threadripper, where they did make other processors, and over the years, maybe 2010, 2009 was the last time that AMD were decent, and the two were kind of on par, and then Intel got 10% better, 10% better, 10% better every year, and AMD didn't. Which meant that until recently, if you bought an AMD system, it used a lot of power, wasn't very powerful, it was quite inefficient, which would also make it noisy, and just generally not ideal for a new PC. Now let's go back to the question of, what do you need this machine for? Is it just to record audio? Or is it to also use things like virtual amps? Is it to use virtual instruments like orchestras, which can really bump up some requirements? Is it also to be used as a gaming rig? I'm first going to look at audio-only machines, and then we'll add that in as a factor. We'll look at that as a cost option. There are things that you may or may not have considered as well in terms of things like power supplies. Don't just get the basic one or the minimum that you need, because that can make things risky. It can potentially make the computer either less efficient or more prone to failure. And there's things like a decent case. Audio guys don't necessarily need, shiny, tempered glass sides. What we really want is quiet, because think about it, we're trying to listen to what we're doing. Even if you're on headphones, you don't need that in the background. You just need it to be simple. Before I go any further, one of my friends and clients of the studio, Ricky from Banana Ranch and Piston Funk Machine, asked me to say hello, so hi Ricky. So, let's move on. Here we are. So this is Scan's website. They build machines for you. If you go to Pro Audio, they will ready make you a machine, which is great, but again doesn't help you outside the UK. This is where I went to get their 3XS systems, which is where they custom build. And I went to their Pro Audio PCs to get my laptop. And it's a workstation laptop. It's a little older, but it's kind of in this type of area. I got the one that had Firewire, which at the time was relevant. CPU cooler, yes, that's definitely something we'll look at in every case. Don't you worry about that. So we're going to do this step by step. This is something that I've not done in a while, maybe 6 months, but I used to build all the computers for the company that I was working for. I've built my own audio machines for 10 years, maybe 15 years. It's something that I'm very familiar with. So, yeah, that's the kind of thing we're looking at for a custom build. That's a generation old. Up to always worries me. So we're going to look at specific machines. We're going to go back to the main Scan website, and we're going to start with a case. So if you look in the computer hardware, at the top we've got components, storage, peripherals. Let's look in components at cases. Cases. Now there are tons of choices here. Let's look at tower PC cases, mid-tower PC cases with no window. Generally speaking, that's where I would say to begin. Don't look at the value stuff because it's really thin metal. It can bend and flex and actually damage your motherboard if you so much as move the machine. Because it's so thin, it not only isn't very good at soundproofing the fan noise that's inside. When it's so thin, it acts like an acoustic guitar and resonates. How does an acoustic guitar work? It's a big, empty box. In terms of physics, it's a resonating chamber. And if you use a cheap case that's very light, the same principle applies. The slightest vibration from the fans gets amplified by those doors and makes for more noise than you would have otherwise had, which is really silly. But people try and cut costs by getting a cheap case. And especially for audio guys, it's counterintuitive. So let's go down below the featured products here and we'll look at the cases that start in maybe the £50 range. So if you're working in dollars, maybe just add about 20-30% on top of this, I think. So if this was £50, you'd be looking at $80 roughly for the case, maybe $90. You don't double the price, but it's somewhere in between 1.5 times the price and double the price. Although if the manufacturers have got better purchasing power in the US, then you do get a much better price than we get, because we have to get pretty much everything shipped over. Anyway, moving on. I've been looking at fractal design a lot recently. So let's check out their fractal design Core 2500. See what this is all about. Let's look at the picture. So this, I may have already found something that's not too far from ideal. It's not going to be the most expensive case, so let's go with a case of this level for the lower end builds. So kind of the Ryzen 5 and the i5. So right, tell you what we'll do today is I'll make a new little list here, and I'll start posting in chat. So we're going to make an Intel i5 audio build, an Intel i7 audio build, an Intel i9 audio build, a Ryzen 5 build, a Ryzen 7 build, and a Threadripper build. So that's 6 different computer builds that we're going to look at. Depending on your price range, these are going to be quite different. So we'll have probably quite a few components in common for these. So there'll be a lot of it common between the i5 build and the Ryzen 5 build, and so on and so on, so that at each level, so there are 3 tiers essentially. There's kind of affordable tier, there's serious tier, and then there's what I call silly tier, because that's something we'll get around to talking to. But the i9 and Threadripper, they will be great for audio, but they may be complete overkill. So let's have a look. So this Fractal Design Core 2500, let's have a look at this. Key features. Water cooling compatibility. We're going to avoid water cooling completely today, if we can. Perhaps I'll look at all-in-ones for the i7 and the i9 build especially, but we don't want to do a custom water cooling loop. Let's be honest, we're audio engineers. I know what I'm doing with computers, but I'm not a computer nut, at least not anymore. I used to be obsessed with computers when I was younger, but now because I do this for a living, I need my computers to be reliable rather than be cool. I need the insides of them to do what they do well and not be a showpiece. So all-in-ones will probably work when we really need the cooling, but we're going to go with custom air coolers for the lower end builds. So the water cooling compatibility here is cool, but not really needed. So actually, let's go back to the list of cases and see if we can find something with the word silent. Bingo. So I've already come up with the silent Game Max PC. Game Max? Don't know the brand Game Max, but this looks a bit more like what I'd be looking for. So let's zoom in on this. So you can see there's a lot of holes here for the cables to be routed through quite nice and neat. There's a big hole here to put a backplate on the processor and not have it contact metal, which can be, especially with the bigger backplates on motherboards now, they can be quite dangerous to have near electronics. Not much in terms of drive bays, but that's fine. I mean, we'll throw that. We'll be talking about storage because that's really quite an important thing for audio production now. My main audio production PC doesn't have any spinning drives inside of it at all. I still use them, but not during a recording session. So I'll come back to that. Looks like the power supply goes at the bottom here, which is very common for newer builds. A lot of the cases that I've used in the past would put the power supply at the top, but for newer cases where they use a lot of radiators or all-in-one CPU fans, it doesn't make any sense anymore. So now the power supply goes at the bottom in this little box here. So it gets hidden away and you don't see all the horrible cables, which is nice, helpful. So this looks like a solid case to me, so let's go with that. Ooh, made in China, classy. So let's add that to our basket. Let's also post this, if I can, in the live chat. So that's our case for the i5 build and the Ryzen build. So let's move on. Of course, the postage has been included in the price up top here, so we'll look at that at the end. But you're probably looking, I don't know, between £10, £15, $20 for postage, depending on where you live. If you live on the absolute end of Alaska, then hey, that's your prerogative, right? So we've got a case. So now it's time to decide what's going to go in it, which is the motherboard is the main bit. So let's look at motherboards, and we'll look at Intel first, because of no good reason. Okay, so let's have a look. This is where different generations of processor become really important, because people talk all the time about i5, i7, i9. To me, those mean almost Nothing. Because those are very similar to BMW's cars. They have the 3 Series, they have the 5 Series, they have the 7 Series. If I go out today and buy a brand new BMW 3 Series, it's probably going to be a lot better to use than like a 20-year-old 7 Series. I mean, if you think about it, that BMW 7 Series would have been luxurious in its time, but now it's going to be a rust bucket that's not got any modern features. Same kind of thing here. All Intel are doing with their i3, i5, i7, i9 is they're trying to tell you this is more expensive and for more people, people that can afford more. And is more powerful in its generation. So this is where we're looking at this list. If we look at just the i5s, this line in the middle here, we've got i5 quad-core Skylake, i5 quad-core Kaby Lake, i5 hex-core Coffee Lake. Now, those are all i5s, but they're all very different. And if you look at the numbers for them, because every one of these processors has a number, the Skylakes will start with a 6, the Kaby Lakes will start with a 7, and the Coffee Lakes will start with an 8, because they are the 6th, 7th, and 8th generation of processors respectively. And like for like, you should see about a 10% improvement. That's the way that Intel have gone between like 6, 7, 8. So there's no point in you buying a 6th generation processor when you can buy an 8th generation processor for the same money, get 20% more horsepower out of that same priced thing. It just makes no sense. Because unlike things like cars where, when a car's out of date, they really reduce the price to try and get rid of them. They don't seem to be doing that with processors. It's kind of a false economy. So, what we really want to look at is the latest, absolute latest that we've got. Now let's look at these i5 hex-core Coffee Lakes. Now, here we are. They're available. Now, that's the processor. So, let's work backwards for a second. I did say we'll go to the motherboard, but let's just think about this backwards for a second. The processor is the heart of the system. The processor is the thing that makes it tick. The motherboard is the bit that connects all the pieces, and the two have to work together. So, if we're going to go for what I would consider to be we're not going to do a budget build for audio, by the way, today. Let's have a look. So it's £260 for the top of the range i5. Now how much is the? Let's have a look. Refresh. How much is the Kaby Lake i5? So the 7600K is only about £20 less for a quad-core processor. Now, more cores are very important for audio, I've found, especially if your software knows what to do with that, and most of them do. So let's go back to Intel Desktop i5 Coffee Lake. If I was buying a new system now, I would probably buy this. To be honest, my system uses an i7 6700 non-K, which is a quad-core processor. It's faster by a little margin. It's got hyper-threading, which gives it a little margin again. But, so it's £50 difference. So that is quite a jump up. But this is where we have to be honest with ourselves. How often are you going to upgrade your machine? How often are you going to say, right, my system's out of date now, whole new system? Because that's the way that I try and think about it, is I try and think of something like a 3 or 4 year life cycle. Spend that little extra money so that instead of 2 years down the line having to upgrade it all, 4 years down the line it's still perfectly fine. You'll find that you actually save a lot of money in the long run doing it that way. So, let's add the processor to the basket, and yes, the processor is expensive. In fact, it's one of the most expensive parts of a system now, because it really is what everything revolves around. It's more than it used to be, because as time's gone on, both Intel and AMD have put more features that used to be on the motherboard onto the processor itself. So where the motherboard used to control the memory, the motherboard used to control talking to the different card slots where you might have your interface, or your LAN card or whatever, that's all now directly on the processor. So the cost has been shifted as well. So it's time now to look at motherboards. So if we go to motherboards, Intel, we're looking at socket 1151 because that's the socket that the new i5s go in. And we have to look at Coffee Lake, which is the top row. So that's Z370 or Z370 if you're English. That's the number of chips that you have to get right now. If you're going to use the Coffee Lake processors, the latest generation, the 370s are the only generation that work. They're not backwards compatible. So let's have a look at the ATX motherboards. The difference between ATX, Micro ATX, Mini ITX is they get smaller and smaller, which is cute, but for audio guys, I tend to find that the bigger motherboards tend to have things like more slots lower down, so you can add in things like, you know, a PCIe card, like I have the RME RAIDAT that goes in there. It only actually takes one slot, but then I've got my dedicated graphics card, which we'll talk about. I might have extra SATA ports on one of those, so you might even have Thunderbolt if that's your thing on one of these. So let's have a look, see what we've got that's Thunderbolt compatible. Because that's something that even if you don't do Thunderbolt straight away, you may find in the future that that's something that you then want to add on. And if you've not got a motherboard that even supports Thunderbolt in the first place, you simply can't upgrade without paying again for another motherboard. So let's have a look at what we have. Let's look at ASUS Prime. I'm quite happy with ASUS at the moment with their motherboards. My studio setup uses a Z170 chipset, which is the Maximus 8 Hero. So that's been rock solid, hasn't crashed on me once in 2 years. Not once. In fact, no, tell a lie, it crashed once, and that was because of my fault. I unplugged a cable in the middle of something, which you should never do. The rest of it has been absolutely solid. Let's have a look at this. Optane memory ready. I don't think we're going to talk about Optane too much in this video. Optane is kind of a technology essentially for lower end systems at the moment, unless they really improve it, where it makes kind of spinning hard drives go faster. We're not going to do that at all. We're going to force its hand and we're just going to get a solid state drive. So, what I'm scanning for here is not to see if the motherboard has Thunderbolt. It won't do on board. Desktop motherboards generally don't. What I'm looking for is the possibility. Easy tuning when it wizard fast. I'm not seeing it anywhere. Not for this particular motherboard. So let's move up one. So that's the ASUS Prime. Let's look up the list for the next. That's the ASUS Tough, which apparently they are tougher. The ROG Strix. Let's look at that, the ROG Strix. So the price does go up somewhat, but again, with additional price comes additional stability, I find. The components on these motherboards are designed for overclocking. Now, we're not necessarily going to look at overclocking either, because that's again a PC enthusiast type thing. But I tend to find that if a motherboard is designed for a lot of overclocking, that means that the manufacturer has overbuilt it and made it solid. Because over time, the components on it, especially the capacitors, that is these bits in the middle of the screen here next to the processor socket, they get old. When they get old, they either leak and damage the motherboard, or far more insidiously and far more common, they start to very subtly fail. Not enough to completely brick the machine and stop it working, but enough that occasionally you just start to get blue screens, you start to get hangs, you start to get weird problems with your computer a few years down the line. Where if you cheaped out on the motherboard and maybe only spent £80 on it, $100 on the motherboard, it'll be fine for the first couple of years, but then you'll not be able to pin down why it's crashing, why it's not working. Whereas if you bought an overbuilt motherboard, you tend to find that you're not worried about that later on down the line. Statistically speaking, you're always going to get a bad egg, and you're always in the high end, and you're always going to get one that's golden goose in the low end that just so happens to be fantastic. But statistically speaking, you spend more on a motherboard within reason, and it will last longer. Oh, before I forget, let's just scan down here for Thunderbolt. Intel Ethernet, blah 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 blah. Audio, don't care. Sonic Studio. Safe slot. Huh. Overwolf, clone drive, VR ready. Let's just search for Thunderbolt 0 of 0. So, I'm going to come back to this in a second. I'm just going to quickly dive back to this Core i5 and pop that in the chat. At the end, I am going to take all of these links and I'm going to put them all in the description. So if I do miss anything, I'll make sure they're all there at the end. Now, back to the motherboards. So the Strix, whoa, the price suddenly jumps way up. Okay. If you notice me whistling Africa by Toto over and over and over again, it's because it's stuck in my brain. I've been recording a cover of it for the last 2 days. I'm playing it on a 7-string bass, but I'm playing every part, drums, bass, vocals, keyboards, guitars, everything, all on a guitar, and it's driving me insane, but it'll be worth it. So let's just, search this page for Thunderbolt. Nope. You know what? Let's search the wider internet. Z370 motherboard Thunderbolt and see what comes up. Asus Prime. Okay, so the Prime does provide full support for a Thunderbolt EX3 card. Way. That's what we wanted. So, Asus Prime. Let's go back to the Asus Prime. That could be exactly what we need at this level. So, Asus Prime. Oh, there's also the Maximus 10 Hero, which I'll come back to for the i7. Asus Prime, £160, so something like $200. It's not the most expensive. But it looks like, add to basket, that supports the Thunderbolt EX. I mean, there seems to be a lot of shiny. But yeah, potential Thunderbolt support is what we're looking for. Because now that drivers are coming out for things like the Focusrite Claret, and there's the Antelope stuff that's Thunderbolt, there's Universal Audio that's Thunderbolt. If you're a PC guy like I am, you definitely want to make sure your motherboard is Thunderbolt capable. Otherwise, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So, let's stick this both there and in chat. Boom. Right, so we're getting somewhere now. We've got a case, we've got a motherboard, we've got a processor. Let's round out the motherboard with some memory, because memory Why not one of the newer i7s? We're going to talk about that. If you didn't join the stream earlier, we're going to be doing an i5, i7 and i9 build, a Ryzen 5, a Ryzen 7 and a Threadripper build. So we're doing all of them. And we're going to talk about why. So, onward. Memory. Components, memory. So the latest chipsets, so Z370, is a DDR4 motherboard. I'm pretty sure it's dual channel. And to a large part, I honestly find that the speed of the memory doesn't make much difference to us audio guys. Within reason, because the minimum speed really is 2.4 gigahertz for the memory. So this is where we start talking about how much memory we need. Now, for me, the answer is simple. If you're kind of a medium level user, 16 gigabytes of RAM is absolutely fine. 8 is barely enough to run Windows. 32 is more than I've ever needed for any audio project that I've ever worked on. But if you're one of these guys who uses big symphonic libraries, that might be a thing. That's something we'll talk about when we talk about the higher tier stuff. But this is what I would use. So this is a Corsair 16 gig Vengeance kit, 2666 megahertz memory, which is slightly above the default, which you can set to be slightly faster in your motherboard settings. Let's add that to the basket. And let's also plop this in our i5 build, and we're also going to just quickly add that into our Ryzen 5 build and pop that in the chat. Like I said, 8 gigabytes of RAM is barely enough to safely run Windows with everything going on in the background these days, but 32 is overkill. Memory does not affect, the amount of memory does not affect the performance of a DAW. It does not. There's absolutely no way that it can, because the DAW only loads a few seconds of audio into memory, and audio is not very big. A stereo 96 kilohertz track, 3 seconds is something like 3 megabytes, maybe 4 megabytes. It's not a lot. The only things that take loads of memory are things like Superior Drummer, if you're a big Superior Drummer user, big contact instruments, something like Omnisphere. So if you're a serious power user, you might find yourself coming up against the 16 gig limit, in which case 32 will be for you. But then if you're running all those kind of things on a heavy mix, then you're probably going to want to look at our i7 build anyway, or our Ryzen 7 build. So those arguments are completely valid, but you really should be looking at the next tier up if that's your long-term plan. Because the other thing is, I'm not just trying to spec these computers out to use today. I'm trying to spec these computers out at a budget that people can reasonably justify to use for the next 3 or 4 years. So, like, I could easily record and work on an i3, machine with 8 gig of RAM. But a year down the line, 2 years down the line, that's going to be absolutely useless as plugins get more complex, as the VSTIs, the instruments that I'm using, have more RAM requirements. Like Superior Drummer 3, I believe, was something like 130 gigabytes of hard drive space, which of course you're not going to load all that into RAM at once. You're only going to choose, really, unless we're getting crazy, one drum kit, but that's going to be several gigabytes of RAM usage right there. But even so, for a lot of the guys that use Superior Drummer, they're probably going to use that with virtual guitar amps, or even recorded real guitar amps, which don't use a lot of memory. And then your synth guys are going to use the other synth stuff. But anyway, getting sidetracked. So we have a case, a motherboard to go in it, a processor to go in that, and memory to go in that. We now need a power supply to go with this, because if you've not got a power supply, the on button's never going to work. And this is where a lot of people, like I was talking about with saving money on the motherboard, people go wrong because this would shorten the lifespan. And you'll start to get crashes where you never used to have them. And we don't want that. So let's look at a ATX power supply. So 500 to 580 watts is kind of the range I would look at for this i5 system. The i5's probably only using, let's just quickly look at it, 95 watts, and that's a thermal design power of 95 watts. If you're not overclocking it, it will not use more than that. If you start overclocking processors, you get 10 or 20% more performance for nearly double the power usage. Now, moving beyond the featured products, we don't want to use the cheapest power supply we can, because this is like those capacitors on the motherboard that I was talking about. If you do that, if you get the cheapest one, it might work right now. 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, a year down the line, it starts to break down and fail. There's a thing called capacitor aging as well. Capacitor aging is that capacitors, especially in power supplies where they're in constant use, decrease in the amount of power they can deliver over time, which means that you have to factor in that. So if you had a computer that needed 500 watts of power, which is quite a lot, and you got a 500 watt power supply, sounds ideal, but it's not. Because the first problem is you are running the power supply at its absolute limit. Excuse me, my nose is really itchy. The power supply is absolutely at its limit, which is something you really shouldn't do. You should have them in what's called the efficiency sweet spot. And then a year down the line, the power supply's aged, it can only put out maybe 450 watts safely, which means it's being overused. It can't deliver enough power to the machine, and so the machine starts to suffer, the machine starts to crash, starts to blue screen. You don't know why, you can't place it, but as soon as you put a load on the machine, it crashes. And because power supplies don't have drivers, power supplies don't have applications, you can't just scan it and check it. Whereas, like, if memory's going bad, you can use something like memtest to check it, see if it's good or if it's gone bad. With a power supply, you can't do that. Doesn't work. So what you have to do is buy it right, or buy it twice and possibly destroy your system. Stuart Richardson, this couldn't have come at a better time. Appreciate the wealth of information. Thanks, Stuart. It's really appreciated. So let's look in a price range. So we definitely need to use a power supply that has the 80 plus in it. 80 plus means it's at least 80% efficient. And then there's bronze, silver, gold, which is how much power these things waste as heat. It was the opposite. So if it was 80%, it would waste 20% as heat. So bronze, silver, gold, you're wasting less energy by buying a better power supply. So if you're in an area where your electricity bills are really high, make sure you spend the money up front to get something that's 80 plus gold or maybe even platinum, because that extra money you spent on the power supply will be saved in the fact that you use less power from the wall. Now, who do I trust? I tend to trust Corsair with my power. My studio computer actually uses a Seasonic power supply, but that's because at the time, mine, you might have seen the completely silent studio build. I went for a fanless build, and Seasonic were the only people really making completely fanless power supplies at the time. We're not going to look at that today. We're going to look at power supplies with a fan in, because now a lot of modern power supplies, they automatically have kind of fan stop where they don't even spin their fans up at all unless they really need it. So if they're kind of not doing too much and the computer's not under a great load, it's stock silent. That was something I was thinking about with the silent build, but the problem is as soon as I do something that's heavy duty, the fan kicks in, there's noise, defeats the point, whereas here, not a problem. We're looking at, I would say, something like a hybrid modular 80 plus gold. Bingo. So this is probably what we want to be looking at. This is the Corsair TX 550. So this is a 550 watt power supply, which I would recommend for a system that uses at most about 400 watts, which is quite a lot now for a modern system. Power requirements have been going down and down and down. That i5 that was a 6-core processor uses less than 100 watts at full load. We're going to talk about graphics cards as well and whether you want one, whether you need one. But in the meantime, I think this should be added to our basket and will get pasted in the i5 and the Ryzen 5 build, and will also get popped into the chat. The stream is not sponsored, by the way, but I am using Synergy, which is something that Linus Tech Tips use, and they have an advertising spot with them. Whenever I'm pasting these links in the chat, that's actually on a completely different machine. The stream machine is off to my side, and my laptop's in front of me, but I can just copy and paste those links and move my mouse over and keyboard as if it was the same machine, which is pretty funky and pretty useful as well. Anyway, onward. Hey, maybe they'll sponsor me at some point in the future. I'll just keep plugging it. Hey, so we now have a case. We now have a motherboard, processor, and memory, and something to power it all with. Now, I'm going to assume that you already have a monitor. I'm going to assume that you already have a keyboard and a mouse. The prices of those are going to be outside the scope of this video because that's very much a personal choice. At home, I use a really cheap keyboard. I mean, it's an awful kind of thing, but it's quiet and squishy, and I wouldn't type on it out for hours on end, but in the studio I use a mechanical keyboard because it's much more accurate and fast for when I'm on the clock, as it were. So that's up to you. You can use a £10 set from Walmart if you want. You can use really high-end stuff if you want. That doesn't, for me, affect the quality of your music production. And unless they break over time, they're not actually going to get, they're not going to affect your mixing. Not directly, anyway. So, we now are only short of storage, and we are short of, we're going to put a DVD drive in there. Why? DVD drives are massively outdated. You might already have a DVD drive lying around, you might have a friend who's got one. They're not expensive, and as a music producer, I very often get asked for a CD. Or a DVD. Generally a CD. No one makes CD drives anymore, but DVD drives are so dirt cheap. DVD writer drives are so dirt cheap that you may as well get one. So here, Asus DVD rewriter that's serial ATA, SATA or SATA as you want to call it. Come on. £11.94. So cheap that you may as well do this. So I'm going to throw these in here. I'm just going to stretch this out so it's much easier to read. And I'm going to throw that in chat as well. I mean, to be honest, the quality of your CD, DVD drive, they're all on par with each other these days. It really doesn't matter. Just be careful if you get one second hand, because quite often the motor or the laser might be dusty or full of gunk. I think for a machine like this, you are better off buying one new. And it'll probably almost never get used, but when you've got a client who says, that's great, can I have a CD? You'll be thankful you've got one. It's something that's cropped up for me a few times. It's maybe 2 or 3 times this year that I've had to give a client a CD. But when I've needed to, it's been useful. So storage is the last thing. Now, solid state is the way to go for your boot drive. There are no two ways about it. The way that Windows 10 works, or even if you're deciding that you're going with Windows 7 or 8, that is your prerogative, but I must say that a solid state drive to start Windows and load your programs from is essential, because not because they go faster, It's about what's called random read and write times, otherwise known with the older spinning drives as disk thrashing. If you're trying to load a program, you're trying to load a sample set like say Superior Drummer, and you hit play on your audio, on an old spinning drive, everything is going to slow right down. It's going to be like walking through treacle. It just slows everything to a grinding halt. And the reason is that you've got to think of the old spinning drives like a vinyl record. When you ask it for information, it's always spinning. It puts a needle down, takes the information, picks it up, moves it, puts it back down. If you leave it down, it can pull data off there fairly fast. Problem is, things like Windows use a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of this, a bit of that. You load a program, it's over there. It uses a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of that. So the needle spends more time in the air moving from location to location than it does actually reading the damn data. Whereas solid-state drives are kind of glorified memory. They're not actually RAM, but they're kind of in between. Which means if you go to it with a list of I need this, this, and this, it goes, okay, there you go. That's why Windows on solid-state drives turns on like bang. And that's something that, quite importantly, especially for audio guys, doesn't slow down over time. Whereas with spinning drives, as you install programs, install audio software, uninstall, update, change things, the new files get put in different places, and it's an absolute nightmare because even the old defragmenting thing, which is the equivalent on a hard drive of tidying your bedroom, it's not ideal. It doesn't cover every base, so we need a solid state drive. So let's look at for these i5 and Ryzen 5 builds. Let's look at storage. SSDs. What we're going to do is we're going to have a 2.5-inch SATA 3 drive that's, let's say, 256 gigabytes, or 256, that area, which is enough for Windows. It's enough, in my opinion, for all your programs and should leave a sizable chunk of free space, which becomes not free space over time. It just kind of gets clogged and cluttered, but that won't slow things down. We're also going to put a spinning drive in this system, maybe a 2 terabyte drive or a 3 terabyte drive, and you can use that. Say if you've got something like Superior Drummer or you've got virtual instruments and all your projects, you can put those on that separate drive. Now, like I said, it's not as fast, but if you hit record on something like Pro Tools or Reaper, that will have absolutely no problems recording hundreds of tracks of audio onto a spinning drive if Windows and all your programs are being run off something completely separate, because then they're not interfering with each other. The problem with spinning drives is when you're trying to record audio, load your samples, and run Windows and all your programs all at the same time off the same drive. When you're not doing that, that takes most of the problem away. I mean, it's nice to have things like big sample libraries on solid-state drives so that when you load it up, it takes 2 seconds instead of a minute. But if you're a professional, that's a concern. If you're not, being paid by the hour, if you're doing this because it's something you like to do, it's not hypercritical. So let's look at this list and go down until we start to hit 240, 250 gigabytes. Now, I used to trust SanDisk quite a lot with my drives. I'm not saying I don't trust SanDisk anymore, but I just keep hearing glowing reviews for Samsung. So, for this computer, we're going to go with the Samsung 850 EVO. There's the EVO and the Pro that they make. And the EVO is kind of the slightly budget version. The Pro is a little faster. But we're going to get this and we're going to add that to the basket. I'm going to copy that link over here as well. Now, that's also going to go in chat. and we're going to look at storage hard drives, internal. We don't want to use external drives for this. That's a separate concern that we'll talk about at the end. So, we want to look at 3.5-inch desktop drives, 2 to 4 terabytes. Because anything bigger than 4 terabytes kind of scares me as an internal drive, because you get complacent and you never start to, you never back things up. If you've got more than 2 terabytes of audio on a live drive, what are you doing? I mean, I've got a 1 terabyte drive in my studio setup that I've not had to change in months. But what I do is I periodically archive everything, back it up to a second and third external drive. So lots of storage on your live drive is not something to worry about, really, if you're backing everything up, and that's something we will talk about because that's crucial. One of the old sayings with digital storage is store it in triplicate or it never happened. For non-audio related stuff, I use Google Drive and Dropbox for my remote backup. I've got a Dropbox Pro account, so I've got 1 terabyte of online storage. I'm thinking about using that for my audio stuff, to be honest, because then if my backups and my main studio computer all somehow miraculously explode at the same time, I've still got everything. I do have, I think it's 20 megabit upload at the studio, so that would be fine. But if you've not got high-speed internet at home, not for upload anyway, then that's not really an option for you. So let's look at these 2 terabyte drives. I've always been a Seagate user for hard drives wherever possible. I just find that they're reliable. And I've had a few drives die on me that are not Seagates. Let's have a look quickly at the different... Yeah. So for this level of machine, we're going to go with just the standard Barracuda 2 terabyte drive. There are better products that will last longer, be more statistically reliable, be slightly faster as well. But for those are really what you should be looking at if you're a video content producer where you need big storage and you need it to be reliable. And also because we're going to be looking at backing things up, that's a separate concern. So I'm going to add this to the basket. And then let's just talk through this for a minute. So I'm just going to pop these in there. So this is our i5 build. Let's just go to the system checklist, which is quite nice. CPU, memory, hard drives. So there's no graphics card in the basket. That's because for this system, we're going to use the onboard graphics. We'll talk about this in just a minute. Because, hey, on my studio setup, I don't use the integrated graphics. Why not? So we'll talk about that. So this, for me, including postage and tax, comes to under £900. And that's for a system that's a 6-core processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM, a solid-state drive, a decent case, a decent power supply, nothing that's going to die on you. So I should have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I should have 8 things. And that comes to, how much did we say? 898. I mean, prices are only accurate today. Prices will go up and down depending on drive prices, product prices as they go on sale. Some of this stuff's relatively new, you might decide to go for a slightly different case. You might go for slightly slower, slightly cheaper memory. But £900 for an audio machine that would, to be honest, outperform my studio machine right now, marginally, but it would. That's not bad going at all. Now, let's look at starting again with the next step up. So let's say that was an audio production machine that might use a few virtual instruments, that might use you know, might record quite a few tracks. I think you could produce an album on that happily. Let's say, though, that you want to go to the next level. Let's say that you want to... Let's say you want to do 96 kilohertz work quite a lot. Let's say that you load some really big audio, virtual instruments. Let's say that you want to go a bit crazy with it. So we're going to have to scrap pretty much all of this. Now let's go up to the next level. Let's call this the premium build. This is going to be the i7 build. So this is where we go to kind of what I would call the premium. So this is great. Then there's paying extra, and then later we'll talk about the i9, which is going silly. But yeah, silly for audio production is, we're talking like Deadmau5 style size. And to be honest, he probably can do what he does on a laptop. But let's say that he goes crazy with it, with plugins and mixing in the box and doing everything at 96 kilohertz or higher. So let's stick with i7 for the moment. So we're going to use a bigger drive. We're not going to use a spinning drive at all. We're going to use a better case, more RAM. Going to keep that power supply. Obviously, we're upgrading the processor, and we're going to look at a better motherboard. So let's start. If we're doing premium, then let's look at cases. Let's look back again at mid-tower cases, no window, and we'll skim down in price till we find something that we really like. So this is slightly more expensive, but this might be something we might want to look at. This is the Thermaltake Black Suppressor. So it's got sound damping apparently. I mean, oh, sound damping reminds me of the one thing I've missed. If we were to buy that i5, it might come with its own stock cooler, which would be naff. It would be terrible. So what we need to do is we need to get an aftermarket cooler. We need to get one that's socket 1151. We need to get one that is Intel. We need to get one that can handle at least 95 watts of power dissipation, and we want to get one that's not very noisy. Smaller ones like this can't dissipate heat very well, so they will sound like a banshee screaming to die, and your processor will get hot, and it might even have to slow down, and over time this will really not only annoy you, but it will be counterintuitive. So let's go down to, again, let's look at a decent price range, because the cheaper ones, they work perfectly fine, but I tend to find the metal is quite thin, which means they don't do what they're supposed to do, at least not enough. If we're going to do this, like I said, we want several years out of this, so we want a big, scary kind of unit, something that we can use that won't have to kill itself just to get the bare minimum done. We want something that won't break out in a sweat, so that a year or two down the line, if we've kind of forgotten about it, it's got some dust in it, it's still absolutely rock solid and not going to be counterintuitive. So here we go. We're looking in we've got Thermaltakes, we've got Be Quiets, Arctic Freezer, Noctua. Noctua seem to have quite a big reputation right now. If you see anything that says like ultra quiet slim, we don't want slim, we want big and fat. We want Cooler Master Hyper 212. Let's have a look at the Hyper 212. Hyper 212 is, £20. Oh, down from £30. I would say that the pricier ones are better, honestly. Within reason, again, if you go for something that's £200 as an air cooler, it's not going to be 10 times better. Where was I? I was up here. So, for something like an audio production machine where we want it to be quiet, especially under load, because something you have to keep in mind is if you've got a project open with 40 channels and they've all got loads of plugins on, those plugins are running all the time. So the processor load is relatively high all the time while you've got that open. It's not going to be pinned to 100%, but it's going to be not idle all the time. So let's have a look. Oh, so Dark Rock. There we go. The Be Quiet Dark Rocks have been absolutely solid in my experience. And if you want to compare good processor fans with poor ones, I suggest looking at Linus Tech Tips, the YouTube channel. If you haven't already, go check them out and search them after this live stream's done, of course, because they have extensively done things comparing different coolers. Also, Jay's 2 Cents or Bitwit or Paul's Hardware, they do a lot of cooling stuff here. Let's just have a look, see specifications. Dark Rock doesn't do AM4, which is annoying because that means I can't recommend it for the Threadripper build. But the Dark Rock C1, let's just see what else is in this category. Let's go with that because it's got 180 watt thermal design power TDP. So this will add an extra £55 onto our build, but would be well worth it in my opinion. So that goes from 900 to that goes to 953. Doing a bit of mental maths there. So still under £1,000 for an absolute audio production monster. So at this point, let's talk about graphics cards, backup drives, and we're going to treat these separately because these are worth talking about, but I wouldn't consider these to be in the remit of an audio producer's PC. Now, let's look at the i5 build again. If I was to game with an i5, I'd probably be looking at an NVIDIA 1050 Ti because that's kind of a mid-price range kind of graphics card. It's what I have in my studio PC. The reason I got that is because I used 3 screens. Sometimes I go crazy and use 4 screens on my machine, and the inbuilt Intel graphics card can't do that. I tried throwing in an older NVIDIA graphics card and trying to use 2 monitors on one monitor on another, and that started to introduce pops and clicks. Probably because the drivers were arguing with each other. It was working from a driver perspective, but it was interrupting the audio engines for Reaper Pro Tools. So what I had to do then was make the leap to a new graphics card and not use the Intel stuff, which for most people isn't necessary. But because I go crazy and have lots and lots and lots of screen, that was a sacrifice I had to make. So I had to spend, I didn't have to spend it on a 1050 Ti, but I wanted to. At that level, that was what I did. So I went for the Carlmex 4GB, and the reason that I did that is because with a silent build, I went for a silent graphics card. You don't need to do that. You're probably better off with something with a big fan on it, something that's available and affordable. if you're going to game, again, this is completely optional. Might actually be the most affordable one that's there. Right, let's not use that. Let's use... Let's use this one. So let's use the MSI 4GB. So that is a decent graphics card. That can run PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds at a decent frame rate at 1080p. If that's what you want to do, that kind of gaming level, this would fit quite happily into a system. So that would add £150 to the system. So that would go from £950 to £1,100. If you want to use it as a dual purpose machine, that's what I would do. You can go up from there. I mean, that's a really good 6-core processor you've got going on there, to be honest. A lot of games are almost entirely graphics card dependent now, because the processor doesn't get maxed out in most cases. So, in my opinion, if you're a premium gamer, you probably want to go and make a big leap to a 1070. So that would be something like the MSI 1070 Aero. I mean, they're all in a relative price range. They're all between £380 and £450 or whatever that is in dollars. So that's so let's just type it 1050 Ti. And then there's the 1070 there. Let's just paste that in the chat as well. This goes for the Intel and the AMD side, by the way. If you really want to get into gaming and you're trying to decide graphics cards, they probably all work absolutely fine. Huh. I just had an email through that one of my biggest plugin guys that I work with, the guys from Kazrog who make Thermionic, have just had to halt production on their Kazrog Thermionic plugins because of the fires in California. Apparently they're okay though. So we hope they're okay, wish them well. So hope Shane gets back on track and that doesn't cause him too much. So everyone send Shane from Kazrog your best wishes if you can, because it sounds like he's having a really rough time of things. Back to the topic at hand, I've just put the 1070 in chat there. And above the 1070, so if you're going to go absolutely crazy, that would be, I would recommend a 1080 Ti. That is currently the Mac Daddy, but the price is also Mac Daddy. The price can get crazy. But if you want to use this machine to game on as well, and you want to play in 4K, or you want to play with all the settings on Ultra, and you don't care about the price, then I'll put that here. Because that one will add £700 to your system, and also probably wouldn't work with that power supply. You'd probably have to get a more gutsy power supply. But I'm only going to cover graphics cards once, so these recommendations are an entirely personal choice for you and will work for, as long as the power supply can handle it, any of the computers that we're talking about tonight. Backup drives, also important. So storage external, I use spinning drives, and I use 3.5-inch spinning drives for backup, because the smaller ones, they're nice and portable, sure, but I find them to be unreliable in the long term. And as a general kind of guide, I don't use 2.5-inch spinning drives anywhere at all, apart from there's one in my laptop, because it's the only physical form factor that would fit. My external drives are all the big 3.5-inch chunky monkeys, and if I need to transfer data, I have a USB 3. Let's see if I can find it wherever I put it. I have a USB 3 stick that I keep on my keys that's a Kingston, but there are a lot of good brands. It's a 64GB USB 3 stick, which means that I can transfer 50 or 60 gigabytes of information very quickly. and it's always on my keyring because it's metal, it doesn't snap, and I'm not really that worried about breaking it in my pocket. I mean, to me, this is more reliable than those 2.5-inch drives, but I don't keep data on it because I use it to transfer things, and I use the bigger drives for backup purposes. So backup, oh wow, looks like Scan aren't really doing external drives anymore. That's surprising. So external drives, I mean, I use Seagate stuff again. I wouldn't use the 8GB or 8TB drives because 8TB stuff, it's a special type of drive. They're archive drives. They're designed in a certain way, and they're not the best. I mean, sure, they've got like high data density, but otherwise, let's just search for 4TB external hard drive, because I buy them. Oh no, is that? Yeah, I mean, you can get them from Amazon. Let's look on Amazon for a minute. So the Seagate expansion, oh, that's a 2.5-inch drive. Let's not touch that with a 10-inch pole, 10-foot pole even. Why are they not? There we go. Seagate expansion. I find that despite the fact that they're less portable, 3.5-inch drives, they're far more reliable. They use their own external 12-volt power supply, which means that you don't get any potential issues going from computer to computer as to whether the USB socket can supply enough power to spin the motors up, or they randomly disconnect because there's not enough power. And they're physically bigger. 4TB should be way more than you need. If I go for 2TB, that's £75 right there. So I'm going to throw that in the chat. I'm sure you can find something absolutely similar on, so that's similar on Amazon US, Amazon Canada, Amazon wherever you are. So that's the 2017 edition. I don't think it makes much difference internally as long as it's a relatively new 2TB drive, 3TB, 4TB, whatever you feel you need. I would rather, personally, spend £150 on two 2TB drives and back everything up twice than pay £100 for a 4TB drive and then have all my data just die. Like I said, if someone, including yourself, comes back to stuff years later and decides you want to have a look at old footage, or you get a client calls you up, or you just want to have a look at your old stuff, if the drive dies, it's gone. Just gone. It's not like, old photos or old tapes where poor storage means that they're slightly wonky, slightly warped. Hard drives either work or they don't. And if you've got two backups of everything, if one gets mistreated, then you've got the other one. It's kind of worth spending the money. Anyway, let's get back on track. We're going to start to fly through this now. Because I've already spent an hour and a quarter talking about one machine and I'm going to cover 6. So, we've done the i5. Let's do an i7 premium setup. So, let's start with cases again. Case. I'm gonna stick with the Dark Rock Advanced for the i7 build as well because it's 180 watts TDP. Or am I? No. I'm going to go for an all-in-one. So let's get rid of that. So let's start with the case. I feel a bit like a kid at Christmas. I'm like, oh, I can do this, I can do that. So back to mid-tower cases, no window. Let's go down the price range to something that's really quite spiffy. So, I'm really liking Fractal Designs stuff at the moment, so it does become kind of personal choice at the higher level. So let's just make sure this can fit ATX motherboards in, because ATX is definitely the way that I like to go. So the R5 by Fractal, Ultra silent design. It's a little extra money, but I mean, it's made so that all the edges don't cut you. They're not sharp. That's the thing. It's slightly wider, which means that any big components that we put in there will sit nicely. You see at the top here, there's a big mesh. What we're going to do is we're going to get an all-in-one processor cooler, and what happens there is it's got a big radiator that sticks to the top and a little kind of thing that sticks onto the processor, and then it is water cooled, but it's an all-in-one. We don't have to do anything with water, which is always an apprehension of mine. I don't want to be messing with water near a processor. But if it's a piece of equipment that's ready-made and just there, then I don't have a problem with, if they're made with safety restrictions. So it just goes, stick it on the processor, mount it to the top, don't touch it ever again. And the performance of those is really quite good. It's very good, in fact. I mean, it's not quite as good as a dedicated water loop, but at that point, that's, like I said earlier, enthusiast territory. So, let's pick the Fractal Design R5 Titanium. So, we will now look at the processors. So, we're still on Intel. So, let's look at the Coffee Lake i7s. Like I was saying before, let's stick with the latest generation. So, that's the 8th generation, which is why they all start with 8. That's surprising. The 6-core, 12-thread processor, which is the top of the range i7 right now, is £400. Actually, let's save a few pounds and go for the OEM version. What's the difference, I hear you say? The retail version comes in a nice big box and comes with its own processor cooler. And the OEM version is for computer builders like me that don't need any of that. So it saves you a bit of money because you don't need all the stuff that you were never going to use and we're just going to leave in the attic anyway. May as well save £20 for the sake of not doing that, right? Now, already the price has gone up by £150. The performance boost I don't think is going to be huge, but the extra threads might, especially for a project with a high track count, work well, because the way that audio programs tend to work is each channel doesn't necessarily have its own thread, but it's what it's doing to process that will go through. It'll be split up across the processor threads. So you might get a marginal performance increase on an i7 compared to the same level i5. It's a lot more money, and I think Intel have done that specifically to price it as the premium product. But if you're going to go for the i7 for whatever reason, that's what you are going to buy. So let's find a motherboard to put that on. Motherboard Intel. So looking at the ATX Plus again, the top of the range that I would go for is the Asus Maximus 10 Hero. Like I was saying before, I use the Maximus 8 Hero, which is 2 generations older, and it's absolutely rock solid. And it's got support for that Thunderbolt card, which is something I'll talk about in a minute. And it's overall, it's quite shiny, it's quite sleek. I mean, it's very pretty. But you see, there's loads more of these silver capacitors than there were on the other motherboards. There's a lot more of them because these boards are designed to really take some punishment, either because you're firing more power through the process to overclock them, or because the power where you are isn't that great. It means that you're going to have a much more resilient system, which, for me, if you've got the money to spend on it, that's where I would put it. Oh well. Okay, so that's already bringing our price way up compared to the other system. But, like I said, we've got kind of a good system, a great system, and then a silly system. So, this is the premium system. This is the one where, if you're an absolute baller and you want this to last quite a while, unless you've won the lottery, this is what I would do for audio production. So we've got our case, our motherboard, we've got, let's up the power supply as well. let's go to memory first. So I'm going to paste all these in chat at some point and do a big kind of flood, but I'm trying to fly through this. So DDR4, we don't need anything faster than 2666 megahertz because it honestly doesn't make any difference for this kind of system. So let's say we want 32 gigabytes of RAM just to make sure that we cover all our bases in terms of really big sample libraries and crazy stuff, whilst also running a video editing program, whilst also streaming a game, crazy stuff. 32 gig of RAM is not cheap, but that's right there. So it's £360 nearly. So it's about £10 a gigabyte, roughly speaking. So this is getting quite expensive. Let's look at power supplies. So let's look at 600 to 780 watt power supplies. Let's just go up a range as well as going up in level of power. So Corsair, where are you? So that's the CX series. TX series is where we were before. CX series, that's the builder series. I'm really looking for the kind of nicely made, better components type deal. Where are you? There we go. Now we're talking. So this is no, that's Cooler Master. Derp. Keep going. There we go. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of a premium power supply. This is the RMI series fully modular. So it's 80 plus gold. So it's got a big fan in there, which means that if it ever has to spin up at all, it's only going to do it quite slowly. And it's got Corsair Link, which means that it's got a USB header that goes from the power supply to the motherboard. So the motherboard can actually talk to the power supply and find out what's going on, which is something that's getting more and more common. It's 80 plus gold. It's fully modular, which means that instead of the old power supplies where it looked like kind of a dying octopus, you only plug into it the cables that you need so that you don't have to put extra crap in your case. You can just leave it in the box until it's needed, which makes for a nice, neat system with better airflow, looks pretty, it's easy to work in as well. And it's a 750 watt power supply, which is absolute overkill. But then if you end up using one of those heavy duty graphics cards in here as well, like I was talking about before, maybe the 1070 or 1080 Ti, it's not going to be straining to the limit and it's not going to have any problems at all. So let's add that to the basket. Let's look at storage. Let's say that you are a bit of a baller and then instead of an SSD and a spinning drive, let's say we want the entire thing to be a solid state drive, which is what I went for in my silent build. And let's see how much that's going to cost us. So let's stick with the Samsung Evo. So a terabyte Samsung Evo, which is fast enough to have both Windows and all your samples and everything on it. So we'll run a single drive setup for this one. Although if you want to add a second one of these, add another £300. That's bringing our total up quite a lot now. So let's just do a system checklist. So we've got, cooler. So we need hydro coolers all in one. Now let's look at dual fans, because that case that we picked, the Fractal, had a big slot at the top, which if you looked closely, kind of had a slot in the middle, which means it's a 2 radiator assembly. So it's a 240 or a 280 mil fan setup. So let's look at these. So I'm inclined to suggest a Corsair. Where are they? Yeah, it looks like the one at the top, the recommended one, was the one I actually wanted, which was the Corsair H110. So it's got two 140mm fans that come with it. that whole assembly there, that whole big chunk, sticks to the top of the case with screws, and then this little bit down here affixes to where the processor is. So firstly, your processor's not got a big lump of an air cooler hanging off around it, but also the heat just gets transferred up the cable to here, and then from that big surface area just kind of gently radiates outwards, which means that you can be absolutely hammering the thing and it won't break out into a proverbial sweat. Let's just have a look, see. So this does support AM4. So this one, this cooler, for me, is going to be the one that goes on our i7, our i9, our Ryzen 7. Does it do TR? No, it doesn't do Threadripper, so we'll have to look at another one for Threadripper. But that is a substantially more expensive system, so let's just check it out. So we should, yeah, we've got a case, a motherboard, a processor, memory, power supply to power it all, storage, and yeah, so this is it's more than half as expensive again, but this is what I would, this is what I would consider to be the premium product. So let's just get all these copied over, and then we're going to talk briefly about Thunderbolt very briefly. So we got the storage. Let's start throwing these in the chat. There's one. There's two. There's three. So that was the 850 Evo. Let's get that there. That's the power supply. That's the redonkulous amount of RAM. Just for reference, my laptop has 32 gigabytes of RAM in it, but it started out with 16, and 16 was absolutely fine, except that some of the projects that I've done for my YouTube channel, I would be doing After Effects projects embedded in Premiere projects, and it was getting stupidly big and really slowing the system down. But that's like graphic animation with video right there. No, that one needs to go in. So next, after the Corsair Vengeance, don't need to paste the DVD drive in there. Maximus Hero, which obviously, honestly, has been an absolutely stellar thing for me. And there's that. And let's just see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's one less drive, and I'm not pasting the DVD drive over and over. Right, there we go. Lots and lots of links in the chat. So, on we go. So that was our i7 build, and that's an absolute monster. If you need more than that for audio production, you are quite possibly sniffing glue. Let's look at Thunderbolt though. Both of the motherboards that I've picked so far can, if Scan still sell it, Thunderbolt EX, I know it says somewhere, Thunderbolt cards. There it is. This, and I'll definitely post this in the chat, and that's going to go underneath backup drives. Thunderbolt. If you want Thunderbolt on these Asus motherboards, you get Thunderbolt 3. You link in a USB Type-C port, and you put this in one of your PCI Express slots, and you need to plug in a Thunderbolt header to the motherboard as well, and then get all the drivers in and updated and installed, and then you have Thunderbolt ready to go, because Thunderbolt is essentially an extension for the PCI Express to go straight out with power to an external device. That's where it gets a bit interesting, because you have to supply quite a lot of power on these. There's also a USB 3.1 port, just because I think it needs to have a USB 3.1 chip on here to support all of those kind of things. And MDP mini display port. Oh, that's right. Yeah, so you can hook a DisplayPort to mini DisplayPort from your graphics card out if you so desire. So you can then send graphics out from this tiny little port right here. So if you've got something like one of those, I think it was an LG Thunderbolt display, you can display a display and have Thunderbolt connected through it. I'm not sure how, but that's how you would do it. Instead of Thunderbolt, I went with a PCI Express card. I went with an RME radar. Let's just see if they still have that in. Yeah, so instead of Thunderbolt, I went with an RME radar audio interface card, which I've talked about quite a few times on the channel. And that, because that's PCI Express, doesn't need interfacing with anything else. That is the interface, and then all those ADAT ports there just connect to different preamp banks and converters. So that's the way that I run things. That's Thunderbolt covered. Right, and so let's look at the i9 audio build, because the Intel i9s are ridiculous. Let's have a look. Intel desktop i9 10 to 18 cores Skylake X. This is where it gets silly. This is what we call enthusiast grade. Now let's have a look at what the options are, because it's not just about the amount of cores you've got. If you've got an 18 core processor, if you've got a project that's only got 40 channels in, you may be sending 2 channels to an entire processor core, and it's not going to give you that much more benefit, really. What I would suggest, if you're going to go crazy with an i9 for audio production purposes, is I would go with a Core i9 7940X, which is the middle tier one. It's a 14 core processor, but it runs at 3.1 gigahertz, and the ones with more cores above that run at slower speeds to try and handle all the extra processings. So let's just clear out all of this. Let's not even bother with a DVD drive for the balling setup. So the money is just ridiculous now. So that's over £1,000 just for the processor. This is if you decide that you're an absolute baller and that you want to go absolutely crazy. Now let's look for a motherboard to go with that. So we've got socket 2066 Extreme, that's the one. ATX Plus. Now a lot of these motherboards are bigger than ATX size, which means we're going to need to get a bigger case. We're going to need a full tower. Now let's have a look. If we're going to go balling, it's go hard or go home. So we're looking at the Asus Prime X299, which again should be completely compatible with the Thunderbolt card that we talked about before. Let's just... no. Thunderbolt EX3 card, yeah. So this definitely supports the Thunderbolt card that we were talking about earlier. So let's add that motherboard to the basket. If we look closely at this, it's an absolute behemoth that's designed to handle this 14-core monster that we've picked. Because X299 is Intel's premium board type that goes with the i9s. It's got RGB on it. I don't care. It's got an M2 port, which is something that we're going to talk about now, because the M2 port is the newest storage format, because we've got big drives. We've got a serial ATA SATA for solid state drives, which caps out at about 500 megabit a second. Was it? No, 500 megabytes a second, which is significantly faster. But 500 megabytes a second might not be enough if you want everything to happen now. If your budget isn't an issue, which it really shouldn't be if we're looking at these kind of platforms, then what we're going to do is we're going to use an M2 drive to start Windows from, and then we're going to use a serial ATA drive to store all your audio and your samples on. Again, this is a ball-in setup, so what we're going to do is go into storage, SSD, M2, and you want to look at NVMe ones because they're the fast ones. And we're going to look at 600 gigabytes to a terabyte. Now, Samsung 960 EVOs have been good to us so far, but we're going to look at the 960 Pro. We're going to use a terabyte M2 drive that's about the size of a pack of chewing gum, and it's lightning fast. It's 3.5 gigabytes a second. That's crazy. So let's add that to the basket, and then we're going to go back to solid state drives, SATA 2, and we're going to put a 2 terabyte 850 Pro in for storage, and that's 700 and something pounds right there, which is also crazy. But that means that there is absolutely no excuse for your system to slow down because of storage at all, ever, in possibly the history of humanity. I would still suggest that you get the backup drives though, but that's a separate thing. So the price is already going crazy. What have I got now? So we've not even got a case. Let's look at a case. I think what I'm going to do is we're going to spec the i9 case out. Then we're going to have a quick break before we talk about the Ryzen and Threadripper systems. Full tower cases, that's what we want to look at. Now let's look at recommended stuff. No, we want something big, monolithic. What have we got up in this price range that's... Okay, so I know what I said before about tempered glass, all that kind of stuff. But if you've got this much money that you can afford an i9 system, you probably want to show it off. That's actually not very pretty as a case. It's kind of cool, but let's have a look. Thermal takes the tower. So that is definitely going to show off your system to whoever cares and goes, ooh, is that an i9? And that's probably the entire purpose of you doing this, right? So that's going to go in the basket. And let's look at power supplies. This is where, again, if we're going for baller, then let's look at... It's not the amount of watts either that really matters. It's... there was one that I saw that was very expensive. Corsair are definitely my go-to. Let's have a look at this one. So this is the HX1200i. This has that digital link again so that your motherboard can talk to your power supply and see exactly what's going on. It's fully modular, 80 plus platinum, which means that you're not going to use as much power from the wall, which especially with a high power system like this is going to be more important. Let's see what else. So we've got storage, we've got a case, we've got a motherboard. We need a cooler. Cooling water. All-in-ones. Now we should be able to fit a triple fan in here, which I would definitely recommend for something like this, where it seems that Corsair don't do one, so I'm going to have to look at the Fractal Design Celsius S36. Now this monster is bigger than it appears in this photo, but that 14-core processor is going to kick out a lot of heat if you're really ragging it. So that is what I would recommend, something like this, because that will slam in the top of the computer case or at the back or at the side, wherever is convenient. And that will go together beautifully. Let's just have a quick check of this case to make sure. It says it's got two 140mm fans that come with it, but let's make sure there's somewhere for a 360 radiator to go. Yeah, right there. So what you would do is you'd have your CPU cooler there, and the cables would come through one of the grommets somewhere, and then the bit would stick on top of the processor and just take the heat away. Very nice, very nice. So that is, I think, the most expensive computer that's not just been completely unrealistic that I've spec'd out in a long time. So let's just make sure it's got everything. So we've got a case, we've got a motherboard, we've got a processor, not got any memory. That's what's missing. Let's just check, but I think the X299 motherboards are quad channel memory. Quad channel memory, yeah. So the top end processors, which is what we've gone for, can address 4 channels of memory at the same time, which for 14 cores starts to make sense. So we want to look at absolutely crazy. Come on, brain, you can do this. Got a text which threw me. Memory, RAM, quad channel, 2066 megahertz. Because, like I said, on the Intel stuff, going any faster than that doesn't really make any sense. Now, I know that there's an option for 128 gig of RAM there, but I'm going to stick with 64, and I'm not going to LED it up because LEDs are not my thing. So that is 64 gigabytes of RAM. If you need 64 gig of RAM for your audio system, you're probably Hans Zimmer. You're probably doing something absolutely crazy, but that is a ball-in system. So let's just check one more time. So we've got case, power supply, motherboard, processor, memory, storage, more storage, and that's just about it. So that's £4,285.87. Oh my word. And I didn't write down how much the other one was, but it was about $1,650. So that's the thing with the price curve, is you've got affordable, little out of reach, but justifiable for a business, crazy. And I don't think the performance improvement is going to justify that much more money. So what I'm going to do now, I think it's getting late here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the Ryzen and Threadripper builds in another video. So apologies if you've been expecting Ryzen and Threadripper builds in this video, but it's just taken us quite a long time to get to this point. I'm going to follow up on this week. Probably Thursday, maybe late Thursday. It's already Monday. And I've got another video coming out tomorrow. I'm working Wednesday night. I'm working Thursday day with a client. So, yes, to save this being a 3.5 hour stream, I'm going to come back to this next time. So, I'm going to put this whole thing not including the Ryzen stuff. And I'm going to make sure that I rename the stream afterwards so that it's indicating that it's not got the AMD stuff in it. And I'm going to post all of that in the description. Let's see if I can do that now. Yes, indeed I can. Boom. There we go. Right, changes are being saved. The description is now updated with all of that. So, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope this has been educational for you. It's certainly been a journey for me because I've not actually looked at the Coffee Lake stuff yet. I'm still on I'm still on Skylake, and there wasn't any point in me upgrading to the next version up. Because for a 10% increase, just would have been silly. So, thanks for watching, guys, and I'm going to see you in the next video. Take care.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.